Simply put, The Last of Us was the reason I finally gave in and bought a PlayStation 3. After seeing the previews both in print and via gaming websites, The Last of Us seemed like a must-play experience that saw yours truly purchase a PS3 2 months before its impending December 2012 release. After several delays, The Last of Us finally saw its release in June of 2013 and delivered upon all of the high expectations with mostly solid gameplay rooted in what the developer Naughty Dog had crafted with the first 3 Uncharted games, and a heartbreaking story. Though The Last of Us proved successfully both critically and financially, it felt like one of those games that didn't need a sequel. Yet a little over 3 years after the original's release came the announcement that a sequel was in the works for the PS4. 3.5 years later, and a grand amount of controversy supplied by leaks, The Last of Us Part 2 found itself ready to shake up the gaming world yet again. Coming in with an open mind and having avoided a majority of the leaked spoilers, I just hoped I could get as much enjoyment out of this sequel as I did with the original and its remaster. Four years after the events of the original game, Ellie and Joel find themselves inside the fortified and greatly inhabited town of Jackson, headed by Joel's brother Tommy and Tommy's wife Maria. After a harrowing day, Ellie is set on a path of revenge, focusing on one girl named Abby, who the player gets a chance to control both early in the story and during the game's second half. Throughout Ellie and eventually Abby's journeys, there are a plethora of collectibles that add both little to the overall experience, like state-specific coins, or gives the player glimpses into the mindsets of people long gone, such as random notes scribbled on sheets of paper somehow still intact. After nearly 28 hours, I finished the game's story on moderate or normal difficulty, while attaining all the collectibles and chapter-specific trophies, such as placing a nice head on Joel's head, or winning an archery competition. Taking advantage of New Game Plus that unlocks after finishing the story, I spent nearly 9 more hours obtaining all the weapon and character upgrades to unlock the Platinum Trophy. After the events of The Last of Us, Ellie and Joel have seemingly embraced the life of normalcy in a world overrun by contaminated humans turned into infected plant people, and various factions looking to strong-arm their way into territories for haven. Then everything takes a big turn, and Ellie has to go out and avenge the loss of someone incredibly close to her, even if said person's death was justified in this version of society. The game plays very much like both its predecessor and Naughty Dog's first 8th generation gaming experience, Uncharted 4, with the latter being seen via certain traversal moments, including very similar animations such as jumping from ledge to ledge. Ellie and eventually Abby, the believed antagonist that actually becomes a temporary protagonist midway through the game, have the ability to use cover, be it man-made barricades or tall grass, to sneak up on enemies for stealth kills. In the first game, stealth kills were minimal, mostly because of the need for either choking out an enemy or utilizing a crafted shiv. Both choke kills and shiv stabbings return here, but are mostly connected to Abby, as Ellie is gifted with a knife for stealth kills that can be upgraded for faster executions. Stealth can be overpowered at times, thanks to the return of the game's version of Detective Mode, known simply as Listen Mode, where the protagonist can see nearby enemies even through walls. Though Listen Mode can help the player from being overwhelmed, it doesn't mean the game is a cakewalk when enemies arrive. Enemy AI is more aware compared to those adversaries in the first game, though can be exploited yet again with moments of foes funneling their way to death. Moments like an enemy pulling Ellie from underneath a hiding spot or noticing Abby trying to swim to safety will happen several times for any gamer. Sound is a big deal in this iteration, with enemies investigating or downright rushing toward the sound of gunfire, an explosion, or simply hearing something break glass. Unfortunately, this iteration features too few new enemy types. In regards to the infected, there are the poison-spewing shamblers, presented as less threatening versions of the bloaters, and stalkers that live up to their name by hiding near corners or embedding themselves in a wall while waiting for the player to walk past them for a sneak attack. Dogs are also introduced, trained to discover the protagonist's scent and hunt her down. Dogs and their masters can be killed to avoid the problem of being stalked, though slaughtering an animal even in digital form may be a little too much to bear. The Scar's enemy group focuses on bow and arrow usage while communicating through whistling. Scars are arguably the best enemy type in the game, as they usually force the player to mix together all the combat options from stealth to melee combat to shooting out with those using rifles while pulling arrows out of the protagonist's shoulder. Uncharted 4's melee combat is seen here, with the player being able to dodge incoming strikes from nearby enemies while pulling off counterattacks. At times, these melee retaliations will result in grand victories before the player has to move forward, or the enemy will halt the attack before going for their own onslaught. Without an auto-targeting system on higher difficulties, there will be times when the protagonist will swing in the wrong direction after dodging, hitting nothing but air as the enemies land flush strikes. Gunplay is a little more forgiving and tight compared to its fist-to-fist counterpart. Both main characters have the same base weapons like pistols and a shotgun, but they also have their own specific versions of similar weaponry, like Ellie being gifted a bow that must be charged, while Abby attains a quick-action crossbow. Crafting weapons and items such as Molotovs and even silencers for the base pistol work just like they did in the original iteration. Picking up objects, including rubbing alcohol bottles and duct tape, will help the player create a makeshift first aid kit, or reinforce that 2x4 board obtained a few minutes earlier, via a real-time menu activated by pressing the touchpad. Screws and pills known as supplements can also be discovered by the player that are solely connected to upgrading firearms and character skills respectively, the latter needing collectibles known as training manuals to open up more branches on said skill trees, such as explosives or covert ops. Though the gameplay is really a more refined version of what was seen 7 years ago, just like the original iteration, the game's quality mostly hinges on its story and its presentation. Rather than focus on two characters growing closer as they move across the country in an attempt to potentially make the world a better place, The Last of Us Part 2 focuses on two women putting their lives on hold for the sake of revenge. This rabbit hole of violence begets more violence and loss as the plot progresses, to the point that by the story's end, it's less about rooting for someone to win and rather hoping the cycle is broken. Unfortunately, the journey to that conclusion is something that will definitely divide audiences and fan bases, mostly thanks to the false advertising. Midway through the narrative, Abby is given the spotlight. While Abby's sections do a great job expanding upon the world of The Last of Us on the West Coast, and gives a character who doesn't make the best first impression on the player a chance to rectify that perception, the fact remains this game was marketed and promoted as Ellie's story. Though Abby's reasons for her actions are justified in her mind, and potentially the player's, her nature and character direction as a whole doesn't present her in the most sympathetic light, making it that much harder to support her, even when she attempts to do the right thing when interacting with some of the few new characters given a chance to be on screen for longer than an hour. The twist of playing as Abby is a commendable decision for the sake of crafting a more immersive story, though the developers may have succeeded better in adding a relatable layer to Abby's character, with the first Abby-focused flashback that leads to the midway point happening much sooner in the story, say during the first 5 chapters of an overall 46. On the opposite end of the spectrum is Ellie's portion of the story. Mostly thanks to the player already having an emotional attachment to her thanks to the first iteration in this franchise, the story presents Ellie's actions as both necessary and disturbing. Seeing the ruthlessness of the people who were the catalyst of her latest journey, Ellie accepts killing these goons is helping the world. But during Ellie's quest for revenge, her level of morality is further shaken, to the point of a mental breakdown. By the game's end, Ellie is a person suffering greatly from PTSD, and sees only one way to exorcise her figurative demons, no matter the cost. Technically, the game is incredibly impressive. Visually, it stands head and shoulders above a majority of anything seen in this gaming generation thus far, though there are some lacking textures in the bigger environments, like closed-off buildings and the visible walls made up of overgrowth. Frame rate stability is impressive, with it rarely dropping, though glitches can occur. During the first playthrough saw a few graphical glitches, as well as Ellie falling into the world and the game hard crashing during one of the final chapters. Thankfully, the checkpoint system is very forgiving during encounters, and a death or crash won't force the player to replay 30 minutes to an hour of stuff they've already finished because they forgot to manually save between chapters. A huge flaw from the original iteration returns here, with the ally AI being invisible to enemies, breaking the immersion when no adversary can see a threat standing right in front of them. One of the most impressive offerings from Part 2 are the accessibility options, including modifying subtitles to add names and color coding, to adjusting the color palette for the colorblind. The difficulty settings aren't set in stone, with the ability to adjust the reaction times, sightlines, and general aggression of enemies, not to mention the amount of craftable items available in any given area. Though this is made by the same people who crafted the intricate puzzles seen in the Uncharted games. The Last of Us 2 features some of the most uninspired puzzles witnessed this generation, usually boiling down to moving a garbage bin or throwing a rope over an exposed support beam. Depending on the player, the level of violence depicted in this game ranks up there as some of the most visceral seen in a mainstream, highly publicized offering, and could be a complete turn-off. While the gameplay of The Last of Us Part 2 doesn't reinvent the wheel, or even innovate compared to its predecessor, the way Naughty Dog approached the story will be the determining factor whether or not someone looks at this as a worthy successor or a disappointing experience. For those who were hoping to have a similar, more technically polished version of The Last of Us featuring Ellie in the figurative driver's seat, Part 2 will be one of the most disappointing PS4 exclusives of all time. The gameplay isn't much different from what happened a generation ago, but the story presentation is such a departure from the original iteration that it may cause fans to hate many decisions both big and small. But for those coming in with an open mind and not looking to criticize every choice before the credits roll, may discover an experience unlike any other on the PS4 that will stand the test of time. It's hard to agree that gamers who enjoyed the original iteration shouldn't give this a chance, but it may be an easier pill to swallow if purchased when on sale. And who knows, maybe someone on the fence will play through this and feel like they just experienced something on the equivalent of getting the best birthday present ever, having a ballad sung to you by the love of your life, or simply making silly faces in the mirror.